What is up, everybody? Welcome back. We finally get to dig into some fun stuff. Now I have this block at least cleaned and slightly resurfaced. If you saw the last video, you saw my little DIY way of getting this at least nice and clean and as flat as possible. We just got the head back from the machine shop. It was hot tanked and resurfaced, so it's all good to go. What we need to do now is get some brake cleaner on a microfiber towel because it won't leave any fibers or anything behind. And we're gonna get this nice and clean. Now, if you look close around some of these coolant passages, you can see slight pitting around a lot of them. Some of them you can kind of feel with a nail, some not really. So it's gonna be a bit of extra work, but I'm just gonna put a light layer of RTV just around a lot of the passages here, just for a little security to know that it won't leak. Now we're going to be running a Cutring head gasket. I've slightly talked about it before. This one specifically is a JE gasket. I got this from Drift HQ. You can buy them at a lot of other sites as well. There's also other brands like Athena that you can get from some tuning websites, or like CES sells them. And what's pretty common that a lot of people do is they'll put a copper spacer on top of the block underneath the head gasket to lower your compression. Now, that is ideal in most situations. I'm not shooting for much power here. I'm only shooting for 350, maybe 400. We'll see how it goes. And I want to stay stock compression. I want this thing to rip, and I feel as though if we just do the head gasket, that it'll be more than fine for the goals that I want to achieve. Now I know the Cutring head gasket is way overkill for my power goals. I just want to have the cushion to know I can throw some more boost at it, or maybe if we have something wrong in the wastegate, that even if I do slightly overboost, there's not really going to be much of an issue. Now, having the head gasket be really strong also creates weak points elsewhere, like for example, the piston rings, which is a common failure. So we'll see how it goes. I'm confident it'll be fine. I'm going to be running E35, which is going to make this much safer. So I think we'll be good. First thing I want to do is just wipe all of this down with some brake cleaner on the microfiber, just to make sure it is nice and clean. Now, like I said, I'm gonna put a very thin layer of RTV around all these coolant jackets where there's just a little bit of pitting, just for some added security. I didn't get this redecked, so I wanna make sure it's gonna be okay. And we also need to put a little bit where the timing cover meets the block. So now we want to throw on the head gasket. And I do see a little bit of RTV in some spots, so I want to wipe those. And then we will install the firing rings. There's a flat side and another side that has 3 ribs on it that cut into the cylinder head. You need to make sure that those ribs are pointing up. Before we install the cylinder head, we're going to install 2 of our ARP studs where both of the dowels are. These studs you do not want to torque down, you just want to hand tighten them, but just to have them all at an even playing field, I'm going to torque them to 40 inch-pounds, which is really just like hand tight. So I'm going to grab our torque wrench. I have it set on 40 inch-pounds. and that's it. Now, since I'm by myself, I'm going to go ahead and put one piece of tape on the top of this to hold the chain and the zip tie up here, so I can put this head on by myself and I don't have to fish down in the block for the chain. And before we install the cylinder head, I'm going to wipe this down with a microfiber and some brake cleaner just like I did the block, because there is some oily residue that's left on there from the machine shop. So now that we have the head clean, we have the head gasket on with the firing rings, I'm going to grab the block, fish it over the chain, and use these two studs as an alignment to get the head on straight. Cylinder head is on. I'm going to install all the rest of the ARP studs. And you do want to install these dry on the threaded end going into the block. So just like the other two studs, I am going to put 40 inch-pounds on all of these just so they are even across the board. Then we'll install the ARP washers. Then you want to go ahead and use ARP's assembly lube to get some inside the threads and around the face of this nut as well. Now we want to go ahead and torque all of these head bolts. ARP supplies you with the torque sequence as well as a 3-step torque process. So what we're going to do for the first run is 25 foot-pounds in this sequence. We will set the torque wrench to 25 foot-pounds, and we'll start at number 1 here in the middle.
So right here my camera died, but what you're going to want to do is go over these bolts again in the same sequence, but this time torquing them to 50 foot-pounds.
And then for the final pass, we'll go over all these in the same sequence at 75 foot-pounds. And then last, don't forget to install the 2 E8 bolts. The short one goes on the exhaust side. The long one goes on the intake side. And that's it, we're done installing the cylinder head bolts. Now we just need to work on getting the cam trays and cams back into the head. Now I'm going to let these head bolts sit for 24 hours, come back tomorrow and just double check that they're all at 80. But in the meantime, I'm going to go around the head and use the roll-off disc and just clean up a lot of the gasket mating surfaces. Now for the coolant passage on the back of the head, I have this block off plate. I'm gonna go ahead and clean this up a little bit more than I already have, and we'll RTV this guy on here. All right, so we're back. It's been about 24 hours now. Again, this is not necessary at all. This is just for my own peace of mind. You don't have to wait a day and retorque anything. This is just something that I chose to do. So we're gonna go ahead and double check all these, make sure they're all 80, and then we'll work on getting these cam trays and cams back into the head. So now in order to get the cam trays with the lifters onto the head in one piece, I'm going to use the magnet trick that I use when I remove the cams. So I'll go ahead and put those earth magnets on the lifters, lay a bar across, and we'll bring it over here and drop it on. We'll start with the exhaust tray. Drop that into place, making sure it goes down on the dowels, and then remove this bar that I'm using on the magnets. We'll use a pair of pliers to get these magnets off. And then we'll also lube up the lobes on the camshaft. And then we will install them. So now to install these, we're going to do it the exact reverse of the way that we uninstalled them. So we're going to start here with the second cap. We're going to get it on, get the thread started. We're going to rotate this so the lobes for cylinder 1 are pointing straight down, and lobes for cylinder 6 will be pointing straight up. So we're going to start with A2. Some lube on that guy. Make sure you orient them so the letters are facing towards the exhaust side. You'll have to rotate this in a way to where you can get a couple threads started. And then rotate the cam so that cylinder 1 lobes are straight down and cylinder 6 lobes are straight up. And just like removal, we'll tighten these a quarter turn at a time. Okay, now that we got those just hand tight, we'll make sure that the cam is still in the right position. Put the rest of the caps on, hand tighten all of those, and then torque them all to 11 foot-pounds. And you'll torque all these caps to 11 foot-pounds or 132 inch-pounds. Okay, and now that we got these all torqued, we'll rotate this cam back to top dead center, which if you remember from the removal video, these front cam lobes will be pointing at a 45-degree angle. Same thing for the intake cam. Set it in. Make sure it's on the dowels. And remove the bar. Alright, so we have all the cams back in the head, all the caps are torqued to 11 foot-pounds, and I've double checked that they're all oriented in the right direction. And then we went ahead and set them both to top dead center. Now we're going to go ahead and install the cam locking blocks to make sure these don't move. Now that we have the camshaft locking blocks in place, we need to rotate the crank to top dead center. Now we have to give this 20 minutes to set. Every time that you pull the cams and remove them, you need to give it at least 20 to 30 minutes for the lifter to settle before you can rotate the crank. Okay, so it's been about 20 minutes. The lifters have had time to bleed off. So now I'm going to set the crank to top dead center. Make sure that the cams are at top dead center. And then I'm going to put the pulley back on and line it up with our original marks on the chain. Okay, the crank is at top dead center. We can install our pulley, lining up the relationship with the sprocket and chain that we marked when we removed it all. Now the next thing you want to do is check the clocking position of this sprocket. What you want is the threads in the camshaft to be off on the left hand side, and then when you put tension on the chain, you want those threads to be in the middle of these slots. So what I did was line the sprocket up where it was beforehand, and I can tell you right now that it wasn't originally lined up properly. So we're going to rotate this sprocket clockwise just a little bit to get this where it needs to be. Which is about right there. So this is how you want it, with the threads off to the left hand side. And when you put tension on the chain, you want the threads to just be as close to the middle as you can get it, which is right there. Now that we have the sprocket clocked properly, which it was not beforehand, we're going to go ahead and install the lower chain guide as well as the upper chain tensioner. Short one goes in the front, long one in the rear, and these are E8 bolts that you're going to torque to 89 inch-pounds. Now before I go ahead and install the upper chain guide, I'm going to put in the dummy chain tensioner. The only purpose of this is to just take the slack out of this chain that you're going to need for the rest of this installation. You have one short bolt in the back, two mediums in the middle, and the long one goes in the front. And torque these to 89 inch-pounds just like we did the chain guide. So now we can go ahead and install our sprockets. First thing we'll do is install the trigger wheel for the intake cam. This can only go on one direction. It has a hump here that matches on the cam. Okay, put our spacer on here. So I'm going to go ahead and apply some blue Loctite to these bolts here. It's not necessary, but it's a safety precaution just because there's a lot of vibration in the valve train. And we'll torque these down to 16 foot-pounds. So next we're going to install the sprockets. Now what you're shooting for here is to have the studs on the intake cam here line up with the center of these elongated holes. One more, like so. So these are centered, while at the same time having the threads on the exhaust cam centered as well. So no matter which way you rotate this, the threads are exposed. So now that we have those centered up, we're going to put the spring diaphragm back in. Start off with a 2mm plate, followed by the spring diaphragm itself, which is bowed out towards you, followed by our 4mm plate. But before I install this, I'm going to put some Loctite on these threads. I'll go ahead and snug these up by hand. And then these call to be torqued to 89 inch-pounds. Next thing we'll do is install the exhaust sprocket retaining plate. Go put some blue Loctite on these. And we're not going to tighten these up yet because we need to keep this sprocket loose to install the Vanos unit. Now before we put the Vanos on, we need to put a light coating of RTV mainly around these two dowels here, but I'm going to put a light coat around the entire gasket surface. And we will install our new gasket. And just like when we remove the Vanos, we're going to do the exact opposite. So make sure the sprocket is all the way to the right, clockwise. Now to install this Vanos unit, you first want to make sure that the piston is all the way compressed. And then we're going to go ahead and push it straight on. Now, the trick for this is when you rotate this exhaust sprocket counterclockwise, you want the teeth on this gear to grab immediately and start sucking the Vanos unit in. If it does not grab immediately, pull it back out, rotate this gear until it will. You saw right there, it immediately grabbed and sucked it in. That's what you want. Now that we have the Vanos installed, we'll put on all the hardware. And for now, I'm going to install this bolt up in the corner where the engine lift bracket goes. Later on, once we install the water pump, I'll remove this nut so I can install that bracket. And these all get torqued to 89 inch-pounds. I'm going to start at the middle and work my way out. So then we can go ahead and pull this pin, releasing the upper chain tensioner, and tighten down the exhaust sprocket bolts. Now I'm going to first tighten these to 44 inch-pounds in a crisscross pattern, and then come back and follow it up with 16 foot-pounds. Followed by 16 foot-pounds. Then once all that is done, we'll remove the dummy chain tensioner. And keep in mind, you only need the tension on the chain just until you tighten these exhaust sprocket bolts. Once you get those tightened, you can then safely remove it. And then you can install the proper chain tensioner. Make sure that you have the crush washer for this. I had to order a new one. This is a 32mm socket. and it gets torqued to 30 foot-pounds. So at this point, the Vanos is completely on. All the chains are tensioned. What I'm gonna do from here is pull the timing blocks. I'm gonna rotate the motor 2 full rotations, double check that everything is still timed properly. Start slow just to make sure nothing grabs. So 1 rotation. And that's 2. And what you're looking for is the lobes on cylinder 1 to be pointing inward up at a 45-degree angle. And we'll put these timing blocks back on. Make sure it sits flush to the head. Boom, perfect. And lastly, now that we know the timing's good, we'll install these Vanos plugs. And these call for 37 foot-pounds, but it seems a bit overkill, so we're just gonna torque them to about 30. And 30 pounds. 30 pounds. So that wraps up this head install. Cams are in, Vanos is in, everything's torqued to spec, timing is set perfectly. All you have left to do at this point is just install the valve cover and valve cover gasket. But we have some special modifications we're gonna do to the valve cover that I'll cover in a later video. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. Hopefully you learned something. For those of you who are kind of timid about doing something like this, hopefully this at least made you a little more comfortable and felt as though you can do it yourself. If you guys like the video, let me know. I appreciate you watching. And until the next one, see you later.